Welcome to Marketing Speak, a series of interviews and monologues featuring thought leaders and industry practitioners in search engine optimization, e-commerce, and online marketing. Here's your host, Stefan Spencer, SEO expert, author, speaker, consultant, and internet entrepreneur. Today's episode, number 152, is all about getting PR through podcast appearances. Our guest today is Jessica Rhodes. She's the founder of Interview Connections, a guest booking agency for podcasters and guest experts. Jessica started podcasting in 2014 with the launch of Rock the Podcast, and she also co-hosts the Podcast Producers and Womensplaining. Jessica is the author of Interview Connections, How to Rock the Podcast from Both Sides of the Mic, and she's been a featured speaker at Podcast Movement, Podfest, and Dream Business Academy. Jessica, welcome to the show.
Stefan, thank you so much for having me on. I'm so excited.
Yeah, so let's start by, if you could kind of explain what your business is about, because it's pretty unique. PR firms, public relations firms, they're all over, but you're a different kind of company that gets a different kind of result for your clients. So could you just briefly describe it?
Sure. Yeah, we are a non-traditional PR firm. We focus only on podcast interviews. So we represent entrepreneurs and business owners, subject matter experts, to get them booked on podcasts that are speaking to their target audience with a goal to build their brand, raise awareness about what they do, and deliver content to their target market. And it ends up being a great strategy for lead generation and SEO. I talk about SEO a lot on my sales calls with people because it's usually not the first thing people think about when they want to get interviewed on podcasts, but it's a huge benefit for, SEO is a huge benefit for podcast interviews. So we've been around for over 5 years now. And it's funny because even people that have known me for a while, they're like, oh, you haven't branched out to other media outlets. But yeah, we're super focused on podcast interviews, and that's what we do.
All right. And what's been one of your biggest wins as far as either a client or you personally getting on a huge show or getting a huge outcome from a particular podcast appearance?
Yeah. So one of our biggest wins for our clients, there's definitely a lot. I've got clients like my client, Richard Chapo, who's an internet business lawyer. He's been working with us for years, and he has something like a 450% return on investment. So he just sticks with the strategy because every so often he gets a client, and podcast interviews are a great strategy when the lifetime value of a client for you is super high, because the investment of getting interviewed is so low that it works really well for that. So he gets a lot of clients. A specific example, Tanya Connor Green is a business coach, and after working with us for about 5 months, she was interviewed, after working with us for a few months, she had been on about 5 podcasts, and one of the hosts of the show actually interviewed her and was so impressed by her knowledge about Facebook marketing that host became her coaching client and hired her to do a paid training for her clients. So our client Tanya got about $18,000 in revenue within the first few months. And that was just from a host connection. So I love that story because a lot of people get caught up in wanting to be on these big shows and being in front of hundreds of thousands of people, when in reality, the biggest returns on investment that we see comes from the relationship people have with the hosts who are interviewing them.
Right. And so is it much more effective to get these interview opportunities if you have a podcast yourself, or is it just as good if you don't have your own podcast?
I think it definitely helps if you have your own podcast. I had a call with somebody yesterday he was thinking about investing in getting interviewed, and he had been on about 5 shows. And one of the strategies for him was that he was also interviewing those hosts on his podcast. So each interview opportunity was sort of an interview trade. So it definitely helps if you're getting started with getting interviewed and you have your own show, you can be inviting those hosts onto your podcast. So that's sort of an offer that you can give them. Hey, offering to go on their podcast and interviewing them on yours. And I love that. I wrote a book about podcast interviews, and I talk about rocking the podcast from both sides of the mic, because you have the opportunity to get to know the host as well as them get to know you. And it's so funny, Stefan, that you reached out to me to be interviewed here, because you're actually on my list of people to invite on my podcast to talk about SEO. So, and that's not even something I just thought of. That was about a couple weeks ago. We are coming up with our content marketing calendar for the rest of the year. And SEO is such a big thing that we talk about with our clients, and you're the first person that came to mind. So, but we put it into practice here too.
That's awesome. And it's been a while, actually, that you've been on my list. I have my own Google Sheet of guests I want to have on, and you've been on there for a while. So
oh, cool.
It just took a while for me to get around to you. I've got 200 different names on that on that sheet, and it keeps growing. So, yeah, it's awesome. And I've really had great success working with you, and so has my wife, Orion. For example, you got me into Built to Sell radio, which was really cool. So I had not even had heard of that book, Built to Sell, which is a big book. It's a big deal. Hadn't even heard of it, and then you got me this opportunity, and it's great, and it's outside of my normal sphere, so I can easily, hook up to other SEO people at conferences like PubCon, and like, oh, you're Search Talk Live, I'd love to be on your show, and I have been on that show multiple times, but to have something that's not even on my radar presented to me on a platter like you did is awesome.
Yeah, that show's great.
So how do you find these kind of outside the box opportunities? Because it's not just a simple Google search, I'm guessing.
Yeah. So, that's a great question. So there are podcasts that are talking about all different things. There's podcasts focusing on people's stories and backgrounds, and Built to Sell is a podcast that's interviewing people about a successful business that they sold. And so John Warrilow became a client of ours a few years ago, and he hired Interview Connections to find guests for his show. So we had to find people who had sold a business that was doing 7 figures in revenue, sold to a third party. Like, there were all these criteria. So our job as his booker was to find people who had that specific story. And so now over time, since he became a client of ours a few years ago, we're not his booker anymore, but we always know about that opportunity. So we can meet people and say, oh, wait, you sold a business? Oh, I've got just the show for you. So part of it is just the amount of time, this 5+ years that we've been doing this, we've just built up this intel and this knowledge about all these different shows. And it's a great example too, because you probably would never think, oh, I'm going to go on a tour to tell everyone about the business I sold, because it's not like the primary thing that you talk about all the time. But it's such a great opportunity because a show like that, Built to Sell, John Warrilow also has a column on Forbes. So he's putting his episodes on his Forbes blog, and then you're getting linked on Forbes, which is awesome. So it's not just a podcast interview, but you're also getting a backlink on Forbes.com, which is amazing. And people love that. So these podcasts can really lead to other opportunities for exposure as well.
Yeah, it's just unfortunate that because Forbes contributors were just kind of selling their souls to anybody with a few bucks, that Forbes decided, and other sites like that decided that they're going to no-follow their external links, that they're not going to trust the free contributors. If they're staff writers, no problem. But even if the site has not instituted a policy of no-follows like Forbes has, there are plenty of sites that Google knows that there's something going on, something fishy going on, that and this is not saying that John is doing it, but there are other people that are doing this, ruining it for everybody. So you get, I got this great Forbes link, and it doesn't amount to a hill of beans, or entrepreneur.com, or something along those lines. So definitely, the game has changed. Unfortunately, some people ruin it for all of us, but something to keep in mind. And even though it's a no-followed link, it still can derive business value for you, though.
Absolutely.
You'll get a link potentially from, let's say, a Wikipedia article, and those are all no-followed. But yet you could end up getting a huge deal out of it because you are encyclopedic. You're the reference or the external site that is listed on an important article for your topic. So
yeah, definitely. And it just saying, as mentioned in, and kind of leveraging the fact that you were on an article on Forbes Entrepreneur, even if the SEO, even if the link was a no follow link, there's other ways that you can screenshot it and maybe put it on your blog that you were linked there. So that's what we'll have to talk about on my show when you come on.
For sure. Yes. Speaking of screenshotting, what do you think about screenshotting, like as a podcaster, the fact that you are in iTunes New and Noteworthy? Like that's something that is potentially very ephemeral, right? Oh, I'm new and noteworthy for like a week or a day. Like screenshot it quick, or I'm on the Amazon number 3 in some really obscure category. I'm a number 1 bestseller. Look at me.
Yeah. Well, I guess it depends on who you're trying to impress, because if you screenshot yourself on New and Noteworthy and you send it to me, then I probably will not care very much, because I just am not super impressed by that. I mean, they stopped updating the business New and Noteworthy section like a year and a half ago. So there's people, it's just been the same 8 people at the top of New and Noteworthy for like over a year. So, but if you are trying to impress people that don't know a lot about iTunes, then you might impress the right people. So I guess if it works for you and it helps build you up to your target audience, I guess there's no harm in it. I don't think it's the biggest bragging right that you could get, though.
Yeah. Well, what would be some better bragging rights that you could focus on as an outcome? Because, I think it's important to be outcome focused in any activity.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to go get some bookings to be on podcasts, get interviewed. Mm-hmm. What's my outcome that I should be going after?
I mean, my business coach, Allie Brown, always talks about going for fortune over fame. So I think that one pitfall people make a lot, especially in podcasting, is trying to focus on the fame and, how high up you are in the ranking, stuff like that. What I would focus on is more of the results that you are seeing in your business, because people can kind of fake their way into having a big audience. But I know there's lots of people that have a huge following that are barely paying themselves any money, and that's not who I want to learn from. So when we work with our clients on positioning and building up their bio and how to pitch themselves and show that they're valuable, is really focusing on the results they've seen in their business, the kind of results they've helped their clients see, the kind of results that they've helped their listeners achieve from the content that they've shared. So for example, in my own bio, I talk about how I've scaled from 0 to in the high 6 figures, we'll break into the 7-figure mark this year, with basically no advertising. We literally just started paying for advertising last month. So giving that kind of result, it's like, I don't have 10,000 people listening to my podcast or even on my email list, but I have a very successful business and I've got kind of those results to show for it. So I think that gives me more credibility than just talking about like being number 1 in iTunes, which I'm not either. So I think giving tangible results, and if you're talking to business owners, results that they care about, revenue, profit, building a successful team, client retention, employee retention, like talking about stuff like that, as opposed to how much fame or attention you're getting. Because most smart entrepreneurs know that you can fake your way into being a bestseller. You can buy 100,000 copies of your own book to be at the top of the bestseller category, but that doesn't show how much money you're making or how successful your business is.
Yeah. So how do you get employee retention and customer retention out of being interviewed on podcasts? I'd love to hear that.
Yeah. So first I'll talk a little bit about client retention. So podcast interviews are a great way for it's a great strategy for retaining clients. My strategy really goes back to looking at and thinking about what is the information that my clients want to know about. So on my own podcast, Rock the Podcast, we think about the episodes that we're going to produce, the interviews that we're going to do around, okay, who are our clients and what information do they want to know? So just circling back to bringing you on to talk about SEO, I know that's something that I really want to teach my clients. It's something that I want to teach people that are thinking about working with us about the benefit of SEO and how you can achieve that through podcast interviews. So I create podcast episodes that are going to help my clients. And then I go on podcasts as a guest as a way to, again, share valuable information that's going to give my clients more value. And it just creates this stick factor, because when my clients see that I'm an expert, and when they hear me and when they see me practicing the strategy that I'm helping them implement and showing that it works, it helps them stay with me longer. And I think it's great for client retention, because when I go on podcasts, if I'm going on a couple every month, it's great for lead generation. Usually at least one person from a podcast will just reach out and say, hey, I heard you on this show. So that gives me a story that I can bring to my clients and say, hey, listen, I'm doing this right alongside you, and here's what I'm seeing, here's what's working. And so it gives me a way to bond with them and to share them my strategy and how it's working for me. And that helps them stay with me longer.
Yeah, that's awesome. One of my clients, Income Store, their CEO and founder, Ken Courtright, has his own podcast, and he constantly refers clients, potential business partners, potential investors, and so forth to a couple of foundational episodes of his podcast. It's like, oh, you gotta listen to this episode before we jump on a call together. He actually had me listen to that episode. It was on stacking S-curves. It was, I think, the very first episode of his Today's Growth podcast. And it was really good and really established his authority and how innovative he is in his thought processes. It was not something I had heard before about stacking S-curves. And I didn't even know what that meant until listening to that episode. So I could definitely see how this can help with your clients and educating them and keeping them on the cutting edge of things and helping to further build that bond. I know multiple of my clients are listening to these episodes. They're probably listening right now. Hi. Thank you for being a client. And I'd love to hear also what you think, the employee retention opportunity is here.
Yeah, so podcast interviews are definitely a bigger benefit for client retention, but I mean, it's similar with employee retention. We've got 7 full-time, W-2 employees in our office, and I like doing podcast interviews because it helps me just stay in the trenches of what they're doing every day. Every day they're researching for shows, they're pitching podcasters, and when I'm going out there and getting interviewed on shows, I can talk to the host about, usually it's a host that has either gotten a pitch from us or has booked some of our clients. And I can talk to them either before or after or during the interview about the experience and about how are our clients and stuff. And so I can get that feedback right back to our staff members and to just stay connected with what's happening in the podcasting industry and with the hosts that they're communicating with via email, pitching our clients. So and I also know some of my employees will listen to interviews that I've done. So I think it's helpful for them to hear my story because I like to think that everyone is reading all about me before they become an employee, but that's likely not the case. But if I'm interviewed and I send it, they can learn more about the history of the business. We just hired 2 new booking agents here and, they're brand new. So by getting interviewed on a podcast, maybe sending it to them here, you can learn about the history of the business that you just started working for, which I think is really nice because our employees love working here because it's a new business. It's exciting. It's not just being a number in a big corporation, but they're really a part of something special, not to be cheesy, but to share the story with them and help get them really involved in the culture. Part of that, we can do that through podcast interviews.
Right. And the difference between using your own podcast as the vehicle versus other people's podcasts that you are a guest on is they will ask questions you have never thought of asking yourself or disclosing things, right? And it will give a layer of vulnerability and openness and authenticity to you that you might not present on your own podcast.
Yes.
So I've been on Podcast Junkies as a guest, for example, and we got really deep into spirituality and stuff. Now, people listening to my other show, The Optimized Geek, will get a sense for my spiritual connection. But that's not every episode. That's only maybe 1 out of every 10 episodes or 15 episodes. All the time we're talking about biohacking and productivity and other very down-to-earth things, but get a little gist of my spirituality. Very little. And then in that podcast episode on Harry's show, wow, we just went deep down the rabbit hole. It was really cool. So I could send that to a potential employee or potential contractor who's thinking of working with me, and they get a whole sense of who I am.
Yeah, we have a podcast called Womensplaining. Margie, my business partner, and I do that together, and we bring on guests. We do some episodes, and similar to Podcast Junkies, we get real deep. I've talked openly about times that I felt really depressed or just am really stressed, and that's something that we would never bring that on Rock the Podcast. That's not what that show is about. But with Womensplaining, it really just shows us raw and real. And staff members listen to that. We don't tell them to. But they have the opportunity. It's available to them, and it helps them get to know us because we're all working all day. We're not just sitting around talking about our lives. So it's sort of a just nice way to be real and vulnerable and just let people get to know you.
Yeah. I love that name, by the way, Womensplaining. Oh, that's genius.
Yeah.
How did you come up with that?
So that was Margie's idea. We were talking about doing a podcast just for fun. It started as a hobby. We were doing it on the weekends and nights. And we just wanted a podcast that we could just talk about random stuff that wasn't really appropriate for Rock the Podcast. And we always joke about like mansplaining. And yeah, she just kind of said like, how about womensplaining? And we're like, love it.
Cool. Now, one thing that you use as an important tool in your business for getting your clients booked on other shows is a one sheet. Can you describe what this one sheet is and why it's important?
Yes, one sheets are super important. I think everyone should have one if they're going on podcasts as a guest. Even if you don't have an agency representing you, just make yourself a nice one sheet. So a one sheet is a one-page PDF. It's well designed. It has your branding and your logo. Work with a graphic designer to create it. And what it's going to have on there is your bio written in third person, long enough so it gives all those bragging rights and the main points that shows it really builds you up, but short enough where the host could easily read that as an introduction to their show. So you don't want it to be in first person. You want it to be in third person. So it has your bio, interview topics, 3 to 5 topics. These are bullet pointed. They're not phrased as a question because each topic could have a bunch of suggested questions below it, and the host could choose, I want to talk about this or this or this for the episode. And then suggested interview questions, which are what they say. That's a specific question that the host could just read. And I love it because I'll sometimes be on podcasts and most of the hosts will come up with their own questions, but then I'll hear one from the one sheet and it's totally natural. The listeners aren't going to know they suddenly went to my one sheet. But I love that because it shows that it was helpful to them and it gave them another question to ask in addition to what they wanted to talk about. And then it has your contact information, your website, social media links. Skype name is really important because most interviews, I would say, are connected on Skype. And so you just want to give that to the host. So you use this one sheet when you're pitching podcasters, and when you're booked on a show, make sure that they have the one sheet so they are prepared. So it shows podcasters, hey, here's what we could talk about. Here's what an interview could be like with me. It shows them the valuable information that you have. And then it also allows them to be instantly prepared to interview you. So you, as a guest, you want to make their job super easy.
That's great. And would you mind sharing your one sheet and maybe even an example of a client's one sheet that's a little different from yours? Then I'll put that in the show notes then. Awesome.
Absolutely. I'll send it over to you.
Perfect. Okay. So you mentioned Skype. I'm curious, what is your position on using Skype as the channel or the vehicle to do the interview? Is it better perhaps to use Zoom or Zencastr or what's the Zencastr competitor? Is it Ringer or something like that?
Ringer, yeah. Well, to be honest, I have not found one that I love. I think like every way that we've connected with a guest has had its downfalls. I think Skype is the one that most people already have. I like Skype because the call recorder that you get with Skype, I think has better sound quality than the call recorder within Zoom. If you're recording your podcast in Zoom, I would highly recommend you stop and you find another way, just because I think that it doesn't sound very good. But with Skype, I think the call recorder, at least Ecamm that I have, it has a way to export separate tracks. And I just think that a podcast producer can work with that a little bit more to make it sound better.
Yeah. Than
just like the one track Zoom recording. I mean, Zencastr is ideally great because it's like recording each side locally, but there just have been some glitches where, it gets dropped or there's like a disconnect. So I'm still waiting to find that perfect solution. What we've been doing on our show sometimes is we will ask the host or the guest, we'll say, hey, can you record your end on QuickTime? We'll record ours on QuickTime, send it over to us. And that's like the best case scenario if they can do that, because then we can just produce a double ender. It sounds like we're in the same room, but some people are like, how do I do that? So you want to make it easy for your guests, but still try to have the best quality.
Yeah, that's a great tip to use QuickTime on the guest's end as well, because I just did an interview with Sharon Lechter, and it was a great episode. She's the co-author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Yeah.
And also she is the editor of Outwitting the Devil, that Napoleon Hill book that didn't come out until like 70-some years after his death. Great interview. And there was some internet connectivity issues. She thought she was recording on her end too, just to be safe, because I'd asked her to, and she got her tech person in to help with that. And darn it, if it didn't actually save. So I had no recording on her end. I had to rely on my recording both sides. But we do have 2-channel recording that's automatic in Call Recorder. I think that it does 2 channels. Now, one thing you mentioned is Zoom does 1 channel by default, and 2 channels is very important for the audio editor to be able to change the volume of one track versus the other if one person is not close enough to the mic or has a really lousy mic and needs some editing of their audio. And you don't have to mess around with doing separate bits and pieces on one track. You just do the entire track if you have 2 tracks. Zoom has a setting where you go in and you tick a box that says record both tracks separately.
Ooh, okay, cool. I'm definitely going to edit that because we will use Zoom a lot and use it to connect with the guests, but then ask them to record. But we did do one interview, and then at the end, we're like, great, can you send us that? And she goes, oh, sorry, I never started the recording. I thought we were going to do like a separate thing. I was like, okay. So we ended up using the Zoom recording. We were recording our end on a Zoom H6. So we had like our side sounded really good. And then so we just had to use the Zoom for her. So if you've got a good producer or an editor, you can usually make any setup sound good enough.
Now, Zencastr supposedly has this all figured out for you where they record locally on both sides and then upload right within the browser automatically. Once the recording is finished, it uploads that recording file for the host. And in theory, that's awesome, but sometimes it's clunky. It doesn't work right. And I tried it a few times, and then I started getting glitches and issues.
Right.
I'm like, yeah, I'm done with this. That was a while ago. That was at least a year ago. So maybe it's gotten better.
Yeah, I've had the same experience.
So let's talk about some other things that will make the appearance on a podcast more effective. Having a one sheet is great for getting on the show, and it's great for getting some of your ideal questions, the softballs, inserted into the episode.
Right.
Nonchalantly. But also, if you want people to end up joining your email list or opting in for some cool freebies, that those freebies then maybe lead to an inquiry or a sale, what would you recommend as best practice to get people, the listeners, to opt in for some free gifts? And what kind of gifts?
So this is a great question because I think it's different for everyone. And my advice, I think, is a little bit more non-traditional than what you'll hear from a lot of marketers. But I don't necessarily think a content opt-in is always the right solution. I think it really depends on how well your email marketing works for you. So if you have a great email marketing system, you have a funnel that works, you know that once you get people on your email list, you can convert them, they stay engaged, then yes, get a content marketing, like an opt-in with a lead magnet going onto the email list is always the right call to action when you're a guest on a podcast. You really have to think about what your goal is and how do you most successfully convert people into becoming a client. So if you know that you have an email marketing funnel that works, you know that once people get on your email list, you can nurture them into a client, then definitely get a landing page with a great headline. It converts well. Figure out what lead magnet is going to get people to opt in and do that. And then the lead magnet can change. For some people, it's a white paper. For some people, it's like a webinar. I think honestly, whatever works for your business and whatever your target market wants, do that. So for me, I've experienced it differently. Opt-ins, lead magnets, email marketing has never been like the biggest. It's not been the game changer for me. It's never really driven the most business. Most of my clients were not on my email list prior to becoming a client. So I've just put very little focus on building my email list. So I typically don't have a free giveaway or a lead magnet at the end of an interview. I pretty much give out my website, and which is funny because a few years ago, I wouldn't have said that. I was telling everyone, get a lead magnet, get a landing page. I just don't think that's the advice that works for everyone. I'm running LinkedIn ads right now that goes to a landing page where people schedule a call with me. And that has been working phenomenally because for my target audience, for the people that would hire Interview Connections, they don't want a report. They don't want to sit through a webinar. They know they want to do interviews and they don't want to figure out how to do it themselves. So getting them on a call with me as soon as possible is the way that I get clients the most successfully. So I think you've got to look at your business. You've got to look at who your target market is. Do they want to sit there and read a report, or are they like, hey, I just want to talk to you and figure out how you can do it for me? So it's really whatever your call to action is. I think it depends on what your goals are and what your clients want to do.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about LinkedIn ads. What's the formula you figured out? Like, how much are you spending? Mm-hmm. What kind of ads are you running? Like, what's the offer and all that?
Yeah. So we just started LinkedIn ads about 3 or 4 weeks ago. We're working with AJ Wilcox, and I don't know if you've interviewed him, but if not, we should get him on here because he is awesome. And I always expect when I start advertising, because I tried Facebook advertising like for a second. And I remember when I tried Facebook advertising, the person doing it for me was like, cool, the first month is basically going to be a wash. It's all testing. You're not going to get anything. So that was my expectation going into LinkedIn advertising. I was like, cool, the first month is probably going to get us nothing. Well, that is not true. It has been successful from day one. So we are targeting coaches, consultants, business owners. AJ's company basically like set up the campaign after we did a couple calls for us just telling them about our business and our clients. They set up the campaigns, and then I would log in and just double check. There were some that I was like, hey, we don't want to target this group. So I would kind of like fine tune it. The ad, so the photo, like think about all these different factors. The image is a picture of me getting interviewed. Like it was at Podcast and Conference. So it's a photo of me getting interviewed at somebody's booth. So it's like 2 people with a microphone. So it's like in action. And the headline, I don't have it in front of me, but it's something like build your brand using podcast interviews, chat now to see how this can work for you. It's basically leading to a landing page where the landing page, couple paragraphs about interview connections. It has a photo of Margie and I in a podcast studio, and my schedule once scheduler is embedded on that page. So right on that landing page, people just schedule a call with me. So they're not going onto my email list. They're actually scheduling a call with me. And I tell you, every single day, I'm getting at least 1 or 2 people that have gotten on my calendar. Less than a month in, we've already gotten a new client from LinkedIn ads, and I've got tons of people scheduling calls. So it is working very well.
Oh, that's awesome. And are you doing retargeting so that people who've come to your website now start seeing your LinkedIn ads when they go to LinkedIn?
I don't think we've started that, but that's definitely something I want to do that I've talked to AJ about. So, and we haven't even changed any factors. Like you want to test like different images and stuff. And we'll probably start that after a full month has passed. But so far it's been working. So we're like, cool, let's just keep it as it is. If it's working, well, we're not going to change it. So I think retargeting is definitely something we'll start doing after probably like a full month of the ads being live.
Gotcha. Okay. And what kind of budget, can I ask?
Oh, yeah, sure. Forgot to mention that. So it's about $3,000 a month because we haven't quite done a full month. So in the first, after about 3 weeks, I paid like $2,000. So that's like ad spend plus whatever we're paying to manage it, which the management is super reasonable. Like I don't know what my expectations were, but when they told us how much it is to manage it, which I don't want to disclose their rates because, you know, people can quote whatever they want to different people, but it's been super reasonable. And the click-through rates are so good that we're in this like new level where we went from first paying per click and now it's paying per impression. Don't ask me to explain what that means, but it's a good thing, I guess. So I guess the ads are performing so well that we're in this like new category where LinkedIn charges us a little differently. So it's working well.
Oh, that's great. Good to hear. Well, you'll have to keep me abreast of what's happening with your LinkedIn advertising. I haven't done LinkedIn ads myself. I've been doing Facebook ads, and we're going to start doing some Google ads with retargeting for search and so forth. But yeah, that's something I'm interested in. So keep me in the loop. Awesome.
I will. Yeah, it's been very exciting.
Awesome. All right. So one other question I had, back to the topic of getting some sort of outcome for yourself as a guest on podcasts. Like, what if you wanted to get speaking gigs? What would be, like, say I wanted to get a TEDx talk, for example. What would be the way that I could get that outcome by getting on particular podcasts?
Yes. Well, one of our clients actually got a TEDx talk because of a connection he made on a podcast. So it's definitely possible. And this kind of goes back to what I was saying before about leveraging the relationship with the hosts of the shows. So you want to get really strategic about who you are interviewing with, not just the target audience of the show, but who is the host. And sometimes you can't say, oh, I know that this host is going to help get me that connection. But each time you're interviewed, you really want to make sure that you're investing in that relationship, utilizing the opportunity to chit chat with the host before and after the recording and see where that relationship can go. So our client, Dave Sanderson, he was the last passenger off the flight that landed in the Hudson and has been super involved in like the movie Sully and stuff like that. Well, he's done a TEDx talk. He's gotten multiple paid speaking engagements, and they have come from, well, he's got multiple paid speaking agents from many ways, but a few of them have come from him being a guest on podcasts. He was on one show that it went live, and a day later, somebody said they reached out to him and were like, "Hey, I listened to your interview on that podcast," invited him to speak. He was on another show where the host said, "This is great. You know, I know the head of the such and such association. I think you'd be a great speaker for their event. Let me connect you." So you really just have to be a great speaker, obviously have a kind of a great keynote presentation. You got to do all your homework on the speaking side of your business. But then when you go out and give interviews on podcasts, just be a total giver. I mean, Dave is our best example because he's gotten speaking engagements, and I talk about him a lot. It's kind of like our A+ student who's getting speaking engagements through interviews. And I'll tell you, he is very open to a lot of different kinds of podcasts. He has, I think, has raised his standards of the kinds of shows he'll appear on after a few years. But for a long time, like he would go on just any show. He wasn't like, oh, I'll only be on a show that has this many downloads. He was really going on shows of all sizes. And I think because he had that mindset of just being a giver and not kind of being really selective, I just think that was the mindset of an abundance that has brought him more opportunities.
Yeah, I had Jan Ilunga on this show as well, and we talked about podcasting and how to maximize that conversation that happens between the host and the guest. And we were talking primarily from the host perspective, but I think this equally applies from the guest perspective. If you have a couple of minutes at the end of the recording to chit-chat before you say goodbye, and you're very intentional with what you want to achieve in that minute or two that you have before you hang up, you can accomplish amazing things. You could get on somebody's virtual summit. You can get speaking gig opportunities or get, who knows what kind of potential business partnership type opportunities out of those couple of minutes. Just be very intentional.
Yeah, I have gotten speaking engagements, I believe, from being interviewed on podcasts and having my own show. So I go to FinCon every year. It's a marketing conference for the financial bloggers and investors and financial planners. And when I first came across FinCon a few years ago, I was like, oh my gosh, I want to speak. They've got a podcasting track. This is great. And I saw that I could apply on their website. But the first thing I did was I'm going to figure out who the founder of that conference is. And I'm going to invite him onto my podcast and I'm going to interview him. I did a great interview with him. And I asked him, I said, I would love to speak at your conference. And he said, absolutely, apply to speak. And it was right at the end of them accepting applications. He goes, listen, the podcasting track is full, so it probably won't work out this year, but it's okay. I submitted my application anyway. I didn't speak that first year, but I've spoken each year since. I spoke last year. I'm speaking this year. And I think that me interviewing PT on my podcast and staying really engaged, making sure that every time I see him at a conference, I go up and talk to him, that has really helped. And that all started because I reached out to him and had him on my podcast, gave value, gave him exposure to my audience, and then just kept up the relationship from there.
Yeah. Very cool. Now, let's say that you are a podcaster and you're getting on other people's shows as well, and you want, as an outcome, to get more listeners for your show from the listeners to that other person's show that you're on. What would you do?
Yeah. So if you're a podcaster going on other shows and you want to get listeners to your podcast, that's what you're asking?
Correct.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think that that's going to be your number one call to action then, is to get people over to your show. So there's a lot of results that we want to happen when we're a guest on podcasts. Like I want new clients and I want new listeners and I want more people to my website. But you've really got to think about what is the big thing that you want, because too many options, too many calls to action will leave people confused and not knowing which to choose. So if you want to get people on these shows to come over and listen to your podcast, that's just got to be your call to action. Make it simple. Most people are listening to podcasts on their mobile device. They're listening when they're out, getting ready in the morning, at the gym. So I would just say, hey, when the host gives you that opportunity to connect, if you're listening on your mobile device or even on your computer, go to your podcast app, search the name of your show and hit subscribe, or maybe give them a specific episode. Go find episode 57, whatever it is, give them a specific episode to start with, because that could help too. I mean, maybe you've got really great titles and people can figure out for themselves, but this is a big pitfall that I see a lot of podcasters make. They don't title their episodes well, or all you can see is like episode 20 of the such and such podcast, and then it's the title, but nobody sees that. So give people a specific episode and tell them to subscribe so they don't just look it up and forget about it. So that's what I would do. I would just make that your specific call to action. And then of course, just mention the podcast, have it in conversation, not like in a pitchy, salesy way. But I mean, a few times in this conversation, I've mentioned I have a podcast, and it wasn't like I'm sitting here going, I got to make sure people go listen to Rock the Podcast. But if it's part of what you do and you want to get more listeners, it's got to be a part of the conversations that you're having.
Yeah, exactly. And if you also are trying to get more clients, talk about the successes that you've had with your clients and mention, like, I have a client who's done this, and I have a client who's like, my client XYZ has done this and gotten this result. And that reinforces throughout the interview. It's like you're seeding before the offer at the end, which usually has to be a very soft offer. It's just like, hey, I'm happy to do a free gap analysis call with you if you're interested in exploring SEO opportunities for your business. And because you mentioned client, or, in my consulting practice throughout the interview, that really drives home the point and helps get your intended outcome happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then also to do the same thing with your podcast and say, like, I make sure I seed my other show, The Optimized Geek, whenever I can in marketing speak in this show, because I know that there is a crossover. Not everybody sees it, and they're like, well, I'm not really interested in biohacking. Well, who doesn't want to live forever, or at least a much longer time, or have more health in the years that they have? And there's amazing stuff in that show, and I make sure that I name drop and I mention key episodes. And that's another thing too. If you have a book, you can do the same strategy we were talking about, like mention an episode for people to start with. Like, oh, you got to start with episode 57. Well, what if you said, I've got a great book that you should read, and you should start with chapter 7. Like I do this with The Art of SEO. It's a 1,000-page book.
Cool.
Well, 994 pages. And it's overwhelming for people. When I hand it to somebody and they're like, oh my God,
you gave me a copy.
People say, you're going to make me go overweight with my luggage, or my arm's going to hurt.
At a conference, and I was like, really, Stefan? This is going to add so much weight.
Yes.
But I appreciate it.
You were almost not going to take it, I remember.
Because I had just packed up my booth at Podcast Movement, and I had like all of my stuff from the booth, and you were like, here, I thought you were joking. I was like, what?
Yeah. Anyways,
but yeah, so specific chapter is helpful because that's an overwhelming number of pages.
Yeah, and it works. I mean, I mentioned chapter 7, which is the chapter on content marketing. I say this is not an overly technical chapter. It's easy to wrap your head around, and you're gonna have fun reading it, and you're gonna be able to implement some stuff right away, and that will get them some results, some benefit before they have to dig into the next chapter, and the next chapter, and the next chapter. Whereas if you start with chapter 1, that's kind of sets the stage for things. You're learning about a lot of terminology. Where's the result in that? I mean, it's cool to start with chapter 1 usually, but it doesn't get them an immediate result. And whether it's a book or it's an information product, an online course, or even the first month of coaching or consulting, try and get them an immediate result within the first 30 days before your cancellation period, before your refund period. Yeah. Good stuff. All
totally.
Right. You mentioned that you have a content marketing calendar. How does that work? What does it look like? Like, kind of walk us through this.
Yeah. So we kind of put a lot of our content marketing on hold for a while. As you know, because we were working with Orion last year, we hired employees and we're so busy in the transition from contractors to employees that really our content marketing took a back seat to what we were doing in the business. But now that we're a little freed up, we've got a great staff, we have more employees, we started planning out, okay, we've got to get the podcast going again. We've got to start writing blogs and doing videos. So my business partner and I just sat down. We have a big whiteboard. We love our whiteboards. And we just kind of jotted down, like, we first started with what are the frequently asked questions? What are the questions I get most on my calls with potential clients, on my sales calls? Like, what do people want to know? And what would be most valuable to our current clients? So we kind of come up with topics based on what's going to be most valuable to potential and current clients. And we just kind of jot out those topics. And then we also looked at, okay, we've got videos, blogs, and podcasts. What medium would this topic be best for? So we want to do a tour of like podcast equipment because people are always asking about microphones and stuff. So we thought that'd be a great video because we could just do a video of all of our equipment and show people. Whereas I think that'd be might be a boring podcast to be like just listing a bunch of names of equipment. And some things are better on a podcast versus a blog. So we just kind of like brainstorm all the different topics. We also looked at, okay, who are the guests that would be really great? Because I'm not the SEO expert. I definitely just like mention it as a benefit, but that's why we put your name on the board. It's like, oh, Stefan would be a great person to bring on and interview about SEO because he knows so much. He's referred people to us. So that'd be a great relationship to build. So we kind of look at also like, who's the best expert and who do we want to continue to have a relationship with? So that's how we do it. And we have kind of set every other week for the content as opposed to, I did weekly content on blog and video and podcast for a long time. But we're doing every other week because we want to stick to a consistent schedule, but doing all three things every single week is just too much to keep up with. So we do every other week.
Okay. Well, eventually you'll be able to outsource or delegate all the content marketing and, not have to worry about it yourself. Like my Twitter feed is completely outsourced to a team member. I have no idea what I'm saying on Twitter. And I don't know what I'm saying on my blog either. I've outsourced that as well to my team. So it's pretty good.
Yeah, that's definitely something like in the next year, we're definitely looking at like the next phase of team building is adding in people to help with sales and marketing. So yeah, I can definitely see. I used to outsource a lot of it when I had a total virtual team. I had one of my team members help me with the blog. So now that's in-house, but I can definitely see that we can really ramp up. We've just never gotten that many clients from marketing. So, but again, we've talked mostly about client retention here, which I know it's useful for. So yeah, it's just always balancing priorities.
Yeah. Well, it's also, there's an indirect benefit here, even though you might not be able to point to a client that came out of particular, let's say, video you uploaded to LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. Because you posted that video to LinkedIn, and let's say that you got a mention on somebody's roundup, right? Some expert roundup. And then somebody read that expert roundup, and then they saw you at Podcast Movement, and like, I know this person. Or I know that name. Oh yeah, that's right. That was that expert roundup I read. So it's an indirect thing. And then you get links that happen because you posted it to LinkedIn or whatever, and you're not getting SEO benefit directly from the links because those are followed. All the LinkedIn and all the social media follows every external link. So YouTube and LinkedIn, Pinterest even, they all follow their external links. But you'll get noticed by somebody, a blogger who does link with a followed link. So it's what goes around comes around. I believe in business karma, and you just want to be a good citizen of the world and do good things.
Totally.
And it comes back to help you. Now, one thing I want to mention about LinkedIn and video is that you can add captioning, upload your transcript to LinkedIn. And that's a feature that most people, I think, are probably unaware of. Like, you can create that caption file with YouTube, export that, I think it's an SRL file or SRI file, I forget. Upload that to LinkedIn, and now you have captions, which is all searchable content, will help you with your visibility also in the LinkedIn algorithm. So that's a really
cool,
great ninja tip there for you.
I didn't know about that. Writing that down. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, now, I love LinkedIn. I've definitely been more active on LinkedIn, not only with the ads, but just like connecting with people and messaging. I use it as part of my sales follow-ups. I'll like send people messages on LinkedIn. So I love this tip.
Yeah, it's so much more than just a resume database these days. I mean, LinkedIn has put a lot into just building up their algorithm and the news feed and everything, and really going head to head with Facebook, but on a more professional kind of environment. So it's a social network you should for sure invest in. Now, what would you tell somebody who is thinking of doing this kind of podcast guest booking thing on the cheap? They want to maybe hire somebody on Upwork or maybe use a cheaper service. I don't know what Interview Valet, for example, charges, but I would hate getting those emails from Interview Valet because it just was so obvious. They had never been to my website. They don't know anything about my podcast. It just irritates me. And yeah, and then I start seeing them at shows with booze as well. Like, really? They're here too? Okay. So what do you tell somebody who's thinking of doing this on the cheap?
So, yeah. Okay. Yeah, you can definitely do this on the cheap. I would just be very careful about a few different things. I would, number one, just make sure whoever is doing this for you, you've got to have some standards in place and some agreements with whoever is pitching you, making sure that they are doing their research. And I would also go as far as to say, approve of every show they're pitching we've added that into our service last year, and it has been a game changer. It adds such a level of quality control. And our booking agents are well trained. We have a very high approval rate of the shows that we're pitching, but it just adds that extra level where the client can say, oh, this is a great show. You could tell them that I'm in their Facebook group, or, oh, you know what? I don't want to be on the show for this reason. And it's not something that we would have known without checking with them. And it's so important because your reputation is at stake. I've gotten pitched, and people don't pitch Rock the Podcast that much, but sometimes I will get pitches and I'm just like, it makes the person they're pitching look so bad. And I've just seen too often where people will get a bad pitch from some VA or something or an agency, and then the podcaster will go directly to the guest that is being pitched and be like, yo, you look so bad right now because they just sent this trash can pitch and it makes you look bad. So I would be so careful. I mean, you can do this on the cheap. You can hire someone, you can have an employee do it, but I would just really think about what is the cost to like trying to save a couple bucks. What is the cost to your reputation if they mess up, if they pitch a show that doesn't take guests or that hasn't done their research? Or you could do it yourself. I think that sometimes with bigger shows, it helps to actually personally reach out and build a relationship with that host directly. And so you could just invest a little bit of time into your week to reach out and build relationships with hosts and get yourself on the show. Yeah.
And one thing that is a pet peeve for me and probably a fair number of other podcasters is to receive pitches that are full of typos and grammatical errors and stuff. I don't want to have somebody on my show who doesn't know how to speak or write or type. Even if it's the assistant to the person. Because that's a representation of that represents you and your brand.
Absolutely. Yeah. And because we're all humans, we've had obviously a few times when someone's made a typo and we take it so seriously. But when we have seen that that's such an important part of the job of pitching, that when we're hiring employees, when they apply to the job, they send a cover letter. And I'm telling you, we're so strict that if there is one typo in the cover letter, we don't even contact them. Because if you're applying for a job and you have a typo in your cover letter, it's over. Because that is the most important thing you're writing to get the job. So we've had such a high standard for that. And obviously, everyone makes mistakes. So I'm sure there's been one typo here or there, but I definitely agree that is so important. We're big on proofreading, and a lot of our booking agents went to college for writing, have master's degrees in literature and things like that.
Yeah. And they probably all have Grammarly installed, I hope.
Oh, I love Grammarly. And I catch stuff with Grammarly. I love it. And I'm pretty high standard for myself. But everyone just has that slip and you type the wrong letter. And so Grammarly is amazing.
Yeah, it is. All right. So we're about out of time. What would be, as kind of a one last quick tip, what would be a unique way to just stand out when you're pitching a podcaster? Is it some sort of angle that you're using? Is it maybe an attachment you're sending? Just one sheet's great, but it's not that unique these days.
Yeah. What I would say is to just make your email really personalized. Add some personality to it. We brought in an improv comedian to do a training with our staff on comedy writing. And not that every pitch is going to be a work of comedy, but it really helped our booking agents learn how to write in a more entertaining way. And we've gotten responses from people that are I get pitched all the time, but I'm replying to you because this honestly just made me laugh. And you put a smile on the person's face. So I would just unbutton the figurative shirt a little bit and just loosen up. Write a pitch that's going to make the host smile and be entertained by you, and see that, oh, an interview with this person would actually be entertaining for my listeners, because it's not always about content. It's about interviewing somebody that's going to be enjoyable to talk to for an hour.
Yeah, a great tip. And that reminds me of a great pitch that I got where they were just really persistent. And then on the third outreach, the subject line was "Whiteboard Timmy is sad." And it has a picture of this guy with like a sad face on it. And then, "Stefan, where are you? Why aren't you replying to me?" And it was like, okay, I'm going to reply. And that's how we ended up having Mikhail Yang on this show, who's the CEO of ManyChat, was because the booking agent said, Whiteboard Timmy is sad."
Yeah, I had a great pitch. David Ralph from Join Up Dots pitched to be on my podcast. And this is after we had pitched a lot of people and we had gotten a lot of people on his show. And he said in the subject line something like, "Your podcast is missing sexy middle-aged Englishmen."
That's awesome.
And it's just like, I'm like, I don't even have to open the email. Like, yes, you are coming on my podcast. That's amazing.
That's fantastic. Okay, so where do people go to work with you and get your awesome team to book them on podcasts?
Cool. So yeah, interviewconnections.com. You can learn all about us. We've got bios of all of our staff members that I've been talking about. And if you're interested, just fill out the application and we'll reach out. We can have a call.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Jessica. This was fabulous. And we will catch you listeners on the next episode of Marketing Speak. Until then, take care.
Thanks for listening to the Marketing Speak podcast. Your host has been Stefan Spencer, 3-time author and leading expert on SEO and online marketing, whose client list boasts such brands as Zappos, Sony, and Chanel. Want to learn more about SEO, social media, or just generally how to build an online empire? Visit marketingspeak.com for an archive of past episodes, along with transcripts and show notes. In addition, a wealth of resources that include video-based training, screencasts, webinars, white papers, articles, and blog posts can be found on his SEO coaching site, scienceofseo.com. To reach Stefan, visit his personal website at stefanspencer.com or email him directly at stefan@stefanspencer.com. Until next time.